snatch it back and hold it, baby, one more time.
Today I want to look at one of the iconic amps that came to us in the late 80s courtesy of Mike Soldano, the Soldano Super Lead Overdrive 100. AmpliTube does a pretty clever job here of calling this the SLD-100, kind of replicating the logo from the amp as well. This amp is pretty straightforward. It has a really nice, clean front panel design, and the simulation seems fairly faithful. There's one exception to that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But this amp, to me, is sort of the ultimate talent enhancer. Almost makes me feel like I know how to play guitar. So it's really nice, and it's hard to get a bad sound out of it. So, and with widely varying settings on the controls, you can get a lot of different sounds. It's very versatile. It does have a problem in that the volume can change quite a bit between clean and dirty sounds. Not so much a problem for us when we're using AmpliTube. We have ways to compensate for that and use presets to change a bunch of things so that we can keep the volume the same. But I can imagine on stage trying to use this between the clean and the overdriven sounds might have been problematic, but I get the feeling really everyone bought this for the overdriven sounds. Let's dive in. This head does not have a linked cabinet. In these videos, I tend to always start with the default preset in AmpliTube, and I did that here as well. But in the 4x12 metal T angled cab, I swapped in the British vintage 16B speakers. My hope was that this would more closely approximate the Soldano cabinet. The official manual, linked in the notes, as well as the IK Multimedia manual, indicates the first two switches are for the normal channel only, but my ears disagree, and I think yours will too. But if that were true, then these four controls are just for the normal channel. These two are just for the overdrive channel. The tone stack in the center and the presence on the end affects both channels. I like the layout of the controls, and they serve as a visual indicator to the amp's schematic. The tone stack is all together and sits between the preamp stage and the main gain stage. The present isn't exactly after the main gain stage, but it is part of the global negative feedback circuit that affects the main stage. Later models also include a depth control in this area, which similarly removes low frequencies in the negative feedback loop. Let's get into my biggest question on this amp first and make a request of any viewer that owns this physical amp to verify or disprove this behavior in the actual amp. I can switch to the overdrive channel, dial back the preamp, and leave the master, tone, stack, and presence all at noon. And it shouldn't matter where the left-hand switches are, but let's start with them down. Now, when I throw the switch into crunch mode, let's try it again. And I know my hearing is no longer that great, but even I can hear the increase in volume. As you increase the preamp overdrive, this effect becomes less and less noticeable. Since we are talking about the crunch switch, let's go back to the normal channel with everything set at high noon and switch in clean. And first sidebar, all the knobs go from 0 to 11, so the midpoint would be 5.5, but each knob is marked with an asymmetrical pattern, so 5 ends up at noon. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to tell us, but I'm just going to use noon. This tone stack is passive, so it only removes frequencies. It does not boost them. End sidebar. So this is a nice clean tone as we would expect. What surprised me a little is how crunchy the clean channel gets when you throw the switch to crunch. There is a significant change in volume when engaging that crunch switch. If you want to switch between the clean and overdrive channels in a single song, you do need to go a bit extreme with the master volume knobs to balance things out a bit. Here I have the overdrive master on 1.5 and the normal channel on 11, and the relative volume is pretty close. While we are in clean mode, let's take a quick listen with the bright switch on. and off. Let's switch over to the overdrive channel. When you reduce the overdrive to down below 2, you do start to get some relatively clean sounds. The main stage gain itself is really clean. You can crank the master with this low preamp setting and maintain a relatively clean sound. Let me bring that back down. And as we raise the preamp overdrive, the sound that made Soldano's famous comes into play. And it is this tone that brings me to this amp a lot when I'm practicing. I find it fun to play with, but it also helps me work on reducing string noise. Cranking the preamp overdrive is great for working on pinch harmonics, and also the level of compression makes it easy to sound better when working on hammer-ons and pull-offs. When dynamic range is important, this is not such a great practice idea, but hey, it's rock and roll. Who needs sensitivity? Let's switch back to the normal channel. We can run through the ranges of the EQ stack. And the presence. And we should do the same thing in the overdrive channel. There are no manufacturer suggestions for presets with this amp. Like I said earlier, it's hard to find a bad combination, so it's a great amp for experimenting with. Mostly since it's one of my favorite amps, I just wanted to make sure it was on everybody's radar. I realize for other folks, the late 80s were a long time ago, but for me, it's when all the new stuff came out. If you are interested in the history of this amp and its pivotal place in history, there are many videos on YouTube that cover this, and you can even find interviews with Mike Soldano as well. If you're interested in engineering details on this amp, in the description for this video, I've included some links to a website by Rob Robinette where he shows the schematics and signal chains for this amp. Most of this is beyond my kenning, but he has many pages about amps, including more introductory information if you're interested. Hope you found this helpful. Enjoy plugging into this simulation and experimenting, and I'll see you in the next video.